Start off first by introducing or asking the two people up here to introduce themselves, and then I will. Mr. Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim Love, City Council District 14.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tommy Azuri, Group 3 at large.
And I'm Bill Gulliver, District 13, and I think Mr. Crescimini is on his way, and there may be several others that are coming. And as far as visitors, obviously we have our general counsel and his staff with them. And just a couple of quick opening comments with respect to what we're doing here. I had the opportunity to talk to the mayor of Delray Beach, and I don't think I'm misspeaking when I say after a similar presentation, Delray, the city council or the city commission in Delray Beach opted to proceed with legal action against pharmaceutical companies with respect to the opioid crisis. As you know, we've been engaged. We have a pilot program that will be starting soon. And I think that what we really are looking at is a multifaceted approach to this serious and significant problem. So I'm looking forward to hearing this presentation. I hope everyone else in the audience is too. I spoke to the sheriff today. He met with me, and you know, I'm still genuinely concerned, and he shares that concern about the pressure that this is placing on our first responders. I don't know when we reach meltdown, but he's also concerned about the same thing, particularly fire and rescue. So I think that there are many issues beyond just the crisis with individuals losing their lives over overdoses. And as I had mentioned in an earlier time about the impact of medical examiner's office provided information, comparative information, first 3 months of 2016 overdose deaths versus the first 3 months of 2017, we've seen a 51% increase in deaths. And we are, if you project that out annually, what we're looking at is a potential for 700 overdose deaths in year 2017. Certainly eclipsing by many, many multiples the number of homicides we've seen or will see probably in 2017. Let the record reflect Councilman Crescimini has joined us. And so with that, Mr. Dearman, if you will introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your firm, introduce your colleague, I assume, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Gulliver. Thank you, City Council. My name is Mark Dearman. I'm a partner with the law firm of Robbins, Geller, Rudman, and Dowd. I'm up here from South Florida, Boca Raton, Florida, where we have an office. With me today is Ailish Beg. Ailish is a partner of mine from the San Francisco office. I've got a couple things I'd like to do today, and I'm going to do it as quickly as I possibly can. One, I want to introduce you to Robbins Geller. Two, I want to introduce you to the potential litigation that you mentioned when you referred to the city of Delray.
Can you hang on just a second, Mr. Dearman?
Yeah.
What we're getting up here on our screen is a video of a past opioid meeting. Can we get a live stream on ours, Louis? Okay. Well, sure it was. It was a great meeting. One of the reasons that we displaced the Planning Commission in this meeting was, for this meeting, was the ability to use the audio visual here, and so I hated to put them out, but that was a problem. We couldn't do it in other rooms. So. Yep. Well, while we're taking a little bit of time getting this straight up, Mr. Dearman, let me make you aware of the fact that we as a council appropriated $1,400,000 for a pilot program working with one emergency room here. One of the problems that we see, and I'm sure you see in other jurisdictions, is we are responding, we are transporting, we are stabilizing and putting them back out on the street, and guess what happens most of the time? It's just it's a constant recycle. And so this program, we have Dr. Ray Palm in the audience. He was pretty much the author of this program. It will be a bit unique in that there is a heavy recovery component, but there's also an engagement component after, almost immediately in the emergency room after they start recovering with a recovery peer specialist. And so that person will stay engaged throughout that individual's attempt to recovery. And so we feel like that's maybe the best approach. We'll see how it works out. It's going to be a 6-month pilot program, probably start either September 1st or October 1st, depending upon getting the thing organized and up and going. So that's
certainly the data that you get from that kind of a study will be very important if you decide to move forward with any potential litigation.
Well, we have an incredible amount of data that we can provide to you, which has been accumulated by fire and rescue here. We have a lieutenant who I was kind of hoping would be here, who has taken it upon himself to collect. He's very passionate about this issue, and he has collected an awful lot of information and data from the problems we have facing us here and our response to those. So, okay, we're up.
So how do I get this image?
Yeah, we're a city council.
Listen.
We don't know. He just ducked out for something. I guess maybe what do you think he went to go get, John? Oh, so he'll be right back. So we gained this one, but we lost it for the audience. Is that right? All right, there. I think they're working on it. Carol's working on it here to see if they can get it straight. Hey, Louis, we got another problem. You got us up on this, but we're not up on the in the chambers on the screens.
How do I get the presentation?
Oh, okay. I thought it was the screens that you. Okay, good. Okay. Are we ready?
You got it. Is that better?
Yeah. Very
right.
good. Oh, the age of technology.
Yeah, exactly. Are you all able to see the presentation? Okay.
We're working on it. Do you know any good lawyer jokes? That's the better one, huh? Come on. Do you know any good newspaper reporter jokes? Ooh. Give me a By the way, has there been any more discussion with Palm Beach County?
I will say there has been more discussion, and leave it at that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I know.
If another municipality asked me about a conversation with you all, I would say pretty much the same.
Yeah. Well, I understand that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
So there have been some additional conversations, along with other municipalities in several states.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about your firm while
Okay.
while
That's
we're
fine.
waiting.
That's fine. So the two things I want to do is tell you about the firm, then we'll tell you about the litigation. And the point of telling you about the firm is I think it's equally as important in selecting a firm as selecting a litigation to get involved in. It's something that you should consider carefully. Robbins Geller is a law firm of 200 attorneys in 10 states. The significance of that is that we are uniquely suited to handle litigation like this. We have an incredibly deep bench of attorneys and other professionals, former federal prosecutors, ASAs, and some defense lawyers or former defense lawyers like myself who defended Fortune 500 companies in products liability and false advertising cases. So I think you get an interesting perspective there. In talking about a firm, anybody can get up here and stand up and say, hey, we have a great firm, we're the best, or we think we're the best. So I want to give you some, what I believe are concrete reasons, objective reasons that you can actually look at in helping you make a determination as to what firm to select and why Robbins Geller is the best firm for this case, should the council decide to move forward with it. I'm not able to show you slides, so I'm going to just talk about them. The next slide talks about record recoveries, and so
No, we
you
don't.
have the slides?
You-
We got them? All right. Robbins Geller's record recovery. So here are some concrete things that I can point at when I tell you that our firm is uniquely suited for litigation like this. In many different areas involving consumer fraud, Robbins Geller has not only been successful, but they've got record recoveries in these cases. The largest auto consumer class action, the VW case, which resulted in about $17 billion in recovery for consumers and for states. The largest securities class action recovery, $7.2 billion. And so forth and so on. You can see, if you go down the line, there are several cases in several different areas involving litigation, and specifically litigation that involves fraud, where Robbins Geller has record recoveries. You look at the next slide, you'll see the names of some companies that are probably familiar to most of the people in this room, and those were all defendants who fought like mad to avoid paying up. Nonetheless, we were counsel in the cases involving these companies, and it resolved in a benefit in tens of billions of dollars for plaintiffs all across the country. I'll give you another concrete reason or objective reason with regards to Robbins Geller and why they're the right choice for this case. ISS goes out and picks the top 50 law firms based on recoveries. So they look at its fraud litigation, they look at recoveries for the year, and they pick the top 50 firms. They did so in 2014, they did so in 2015, and they did so in 2016. In 2014, 2015, and 2016, Robbins Geller was number one, and by a significant delta. Enron, that's a case that you're probably familiar with, or at least a company that you're all familiar with. We were sole lead counsel in the Enron case. It resolved with a recovery of $7.2 billion, the largest class action security settlement on record to date. That case required us to think out of the box. That was a case where the defendants, being shifty as they may be, attempted to avoid paying back employees of this company who lost their entire life savings. We were able to, as sole lead counsel, through novel legal theories, come in and make a recovery of $7.2 billion. But you don't have to take my word for it. If you take a look at the next slide, you'll see the judge in the case had some comments in the final order where the judge talked about our experience, ability, and reputation in the face of extraordinary obstacles in referring to Robbins Geller and the result in that case. And so there is another concrete reason that you can look at as to why we think Robbins Geller is the right choice should the council decide to move forward with litigation here. The next slide is the Household International case. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it was a fraud case. It went on for about 12 years. We were sole lead counsel in the case. We tried the case in a several-week trial where we moved roughly 15 or 16 attorneys and other professionals to Chicago to try the case. After the case was tried in, I think, 2004, there were multiple appeals. And last year, on the eve of a second trial, we resolved the case for $1.5 billion. The benefit or the purpose of talking about this case here today is it shows that we can try big cases. It shows that we can try big cases and we can continue litigating other matters because the firm continued to move forward with other cases over the last 12 years. Of significant importance with regards to this case is the fact that we recovered a six-figure recovery for the Jacksonville Police and Fire Pension Fund, and in addition, roughly $13 million for the state of Florida pension fund. So there's a class action with significant recoveries whereby the state of Florida and Jacksonville itself benefited. Another point is the lead lawyer, the trial lawyer in that case, is a guy named Mike Dowd. He is also on the Robbins-Geller, what we refer to as the opioid team. So he would be another lawyer that would be involved in this litigation should the city decide to move forward with it. Volkswagen, I talked about briefly. I'm going to only talk about that to the extent that there were two lawyers in the firm who were intimately involved in that case, and I was one of them. So for the last 2.5 years, I've lived this Volkswagen scandal. It was significant because it required cooperation between states and local governments and private consumers. This litigation that we're about to talk about when Ailish gets up here, I think there's some overlap in the way there's going to have to be coordination. We can clearly do it. We've done it before. We did it in Volkswagen. Drug cases. Robbins-Geller has been involved in litigating cases involving off-labeling. Here's the Pfizer case. It was an off-labeling case whereby they got caught for selling drugs and pushing drugs to doctors to prescribe for reasons that were not FDA-approved reasons. And as a result of that, we filed a fraud action against Pfizer and on the eve of trial settled that case for $400 million. HCA, another case involving healthcare, a fraud, and a large settlement for the plaintiffs in that case. I said we were uniquely suited to handle this litigation, and it's not just because we have a deep bench, and it's not just because of the knowledge we have. But if I talk about the household case for a second again, which we just talked about, you can see we filed it in 2002, first trial victory in 2009. You run down that line, you'll see the new trial was June 6, 2016, when we finally resolved the case. But I think the big point there is if you look at the cash invested over 14 years, it was $34 million. I point that out to you because if you're going to pick a law firm to work with you in this case, you want to pick somebody that is going to be able to finance this case and not come back to you after a year or a year and a half or 2 years and say, we need help or we can't do it anymore. And we are uniquely suited in that context as well. We have a cash reserve of $20 million. We have a credit line which has never been touched. That I think is also unique, and E&O insurance as well. I'm now going to turn it over to my partner Ailish, who will talk about more of the issues relating to the proposed litigation and to the investigation that we think you should undertake before filing any litigation should the city decide to move forward. Thank you.
Oh, wait a minute. Councilman Missouri has a quick question.
Just a quick question. What cities do you represent now, or are you representing cities in Florida?
The city in Florida that I can disclose that we have currently signed a retainer with is Delray in the city of Palm Beach. We are speaking with other cities. We are speaking with other counties. We have not signed retainers yet, and I do not have permission to disclose them at this point.
What about around the country? Are they all going to be part of it? Is this kind of considered a class action?
No.
It is not considered a class action, although I think at some point in time there's going to be there's certainly efficiencies in coordination, and there's no question we've been traveling the country speaking with other municipalities and states. They're clearly looking at this. Other states have already filed. So how it shakes out as far as coordination at the end of the day, I don't know, but I do believe that there will be coordination interstate and intrastate. So I think that at some point is going to be the way that the litigation is handled. We don't know now.
So right now it's just we're just talking about Florida cases, or are we going outside and if there is a suit that we sign up or whomever, is it just Florida cities or is it going to be other cities involved initially?
So for purposes of the litigation that we're going to be talking about, that Ailish is going to be talking about, it would be to be representing either the city of Jacksonville or any county in Jacksonville in its own litigation.
Yeah.
Certainly
Okay.
the city and counties could
That's
be
what I wanted to
part
find
of the
out.
same litigation. But I also want to be clear that that does not mean that there won't be some coordination with cities or counties in the state or other cities and counties or states outside of Florida.
Well,
Okay, thank you very much.
the good thing about us is we're consolidated government. We are city and county.
county, yeah.
Yeah, so that's,
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Ayla Spag with Robin Skeller. Thanks for having us here. So the case that we're proposing would allow us together to address really what is the worst drug scourge in U.S. history. Healthcare providers wrote 259 million prescriptions for painkillers in 2012. As a result, in 2014, there were more than 47,000 overdoses nationwide. That number grows each year. There were more than 52,000 in 2015. The overdose deaths quadrupled from 1999 through 2010. And between 1999 and 2015, more than 560,000 people died, more than the population of Miami. With these figures, the drug overdose deaths outnumber the gun homicides nationwide. They outnumber the car crashes. They outnumber those two combined. They outnumber HIV and AIDS deaths at its peak in 1995. And the current figure of about 59,000 for 2016 is larger than all of the U.S. casualties for the entire Vietnam War. This chart gives you an idea of the steady incline in terms of overdose deaths from opioid painkillers, synthetic, semi-synthetic, and heroin. And you can see even in recent years where some are tapering off, there is a very steady increase in, or a dramatic increase in the heroin overdoses and the drugs like fentanyl. These are the key manufacturers with the largest market share in opioid manufacturing. Mallinckrodt also distributes. And these are the seminal distributors, AmerisourceBergen, Cardinal Health, and McKesson. These are the defendants based on our investigation who, in our view, have the largest liability for the crisis and that we would recommend be named as defendants. Here you have all of the drugs at issue, and this is just a sample of them, not all of them, but all of the drugs at issue are Schedule II drugs, which by their very definition means they were approved only for limited, highly restricted use. Some were approved only for cancer treatment. So the epidemic in Florida. In 2015, heroin, fentanyl, and oxycodone resulted in more than 3,800 deaths of Floridians. You have between 72 and 82 prescriptions written in Florida for every 100 persons. And you have 16 to 18 deaths for every 100,000 Floridians per year. This gives you an idea of the different drugs, the different chart. I mean, the different colors in the chart represent different types of drugs. If you look at from tramadol in the upper left all the way down through fentanyl, you see that the frequency of occurrence of drugs in decedents is very, very significant for opioids. All of those are opioids. As I'm sure you're aware, Governor Rick Scott has declared Florida's opioid epidemic a public health crisis. This is a quote from a recent article where he's commenting on the gravity of the situation. The number is projected for 2015 to 12 deaths a day. So the county here ranks second highest in Florida for babies born addicted to opiates. You know, it's easy. You see a lot of figures in the papers daily about a very concrete measure, which is death. but it's important to also consider the enormous human toll that it's taking on people that are very much living, families, and their communities. You see that in babies born addicted. You also see it in foster care system, parents who can no longer take care of their children. The cost that that has on cities, counties, states. 2015, you have the medical examiner's office with 201 deaths. 2016, the number doubled. And then the cost of the autopsy is another not insignificant cost.
We're on track to double it again, too, pretty close to doubling it again.
I know. The numbers, when you wrap your head around them, when you really immerse yourself, they're nothing short of horrifying. And it's, the one thing about these, when you're throwing around numbers, it sounds like all statistics, but there are people obviously behind each number. Number of 911 calls for overdoses has tripled. This is in Jacksonville. Jacksonville Fire and Rescue Department, enormous cost, responding to more than 1,000 more overdose calls in 2016 than it did in the year before. Rescue officials also saying they're administering more than triple the amount of Narcan, which thank goodness they have access to, but it's a tremendous cost. This map gives you an idea of where Jacksonville ranks in terms of other cities in the country. It's 24th highest for percentage of opioid prescriptions abused. Another figure you have here in 2015, Jacksonville Fire and Rescue Department transported more than 1,900 patients suspected as overdose at a cost of just under $2 million. 2016, that cost is estimated at over $3 million. This is a recent article, relatively recent article on the sober homes, and you see more and more of those articles in this area every day. The enormity of the problem, bringing people in from outside the state to recover, and the toll that that takes, the city and the county where those people are, and the impact that it has when you have less than reputable sober homes, and taking advantage of the money that's there with an incentive that isn't really aligned with helping those people recover. So what you see is that a lot of people are not recovering, and yet there are hundreds of thousands of dollars spent in insurance money. So as far as the claims go, the case would be alleging that the manufacturers engaged in deceptive marketing, that they violated Florida's Unfair and Deceptive Trade Practices Act, which prohibits unfair methods of competition, and that the wholesalers failed to report suspicious sales as they're required to do by federal and state law. So how did they engage in unlawful marketing? We have a 100-page complaint that actually details how each company did it. It's difficult, obviously, to summarize in this context that level of detail, but to give you a little bit of factual background, this fraudulent marketing started more than 2 decades ago, when you may recall there was suddenly a big push to market the illness of undertreated pain, that millions of Americans, and you saw this messaging and it was coming from the manufacturers, millions of Americans suffering from undertreated pain, and that opioids were the answer to that, what was described as a crisis in America. Opioids, which had traditionally been accepted really only for acute post-surgical pain or for end-stage palliative care, end-stage cancer pain. Suddenly the marketing was that these opioids couldn't just be limited for that narrow group of patients, but should be expanded to chronic to people suffering from chronic, everyday pain, all kinds of headaches, backache, fibromyalgia, all of this. And, it essentially explodes their customers. So it was, on the one hand, a brilliant marketing scheme, and on the other hand, a devastating marketing scheme. Because what they're telling people was that, consumers, prescribers, by infiltrating the medical education, by funding neutral-sounding pain foundations to disseminate brochures and guidelines on prescribing, which essentially communicate that opioids are safe and effective for chronic everyday pain. That message is false. They told prescribers that opioids were less than 1% addictive. That message is false. They marketed them as being safe and effective for all kinds of pain, and many of them market drugs that are only approved for cancer to non-cancer treating physicians for non-cancer purposes. In fact, when you look at those numbers, they're quite staggering too, because you'll see the company actually targets 95% of its doctors are not oncologists when it has a drug that's only approved for cancer. How did they do it? They did it via direct marketing through their sales reps, but the much more insidious way that they did it was through these types of pain foundations and the dissemination of the prescribing guidelines, by paying doctors to present this message and to go all across the country. They're called key opinion leaders, and they're essentially educating and transforming the message with respect to opioids to physicians all across the country. And they've even been bribing doctors, some of them, to overprescribe drugs as dangerous as fentanyl, and you see that with the recent example of the Insys former CEO, former vice president of sales, all indicted for bribery hearing. Another example, you have the Medicaid fraud from Subsys that have now pled guilty. The potential damages flow from restitution, so increased law enforcement and judicial expenditures, increased prison and public work expenditures, addiction treatment expenditures, emergency medical care costs, and lost economic opportunity. Now, with respect to all of those, we'd obviously have to sit down with you and have a dialogue as to which of those the city is funding, where the impact is greatest on Jacksonville. There's unjust enrichment, there's potential punitive damages, there's injunctive relief to be sought. And to give you an idea of some of the settlements and guilty pleas around the country, you see for these types of claims already, and against some of these defendants, you see in 2007 there was a large settlement with Purdue for false marketing, McKesson for the failure to report suspicious sales in 2008, $13 million. Cephalon, $425 million, same claim, false marketing, 2008. 2016, you have Cardinal Health settling for $44 million, and AmerisourceBergen, $16 million. And most recently, McKesson settled for $150 million. Also for violating the controlled substance. This just gives you an idea of the enormity of the money at stake for the companies, which is why it's so hard to get at the root of this problem. They're really not going to stop doing this until you give them an economic incentive to stop. And that's difficult to do because you see here, one drug, OxyContin sales, 2015, almost $2.5 billion. So when they have a settlement for $15 million here or there, it doesn't do much. There needs to be a real coalition. There needs to be, a powerful effort by a number of municipalities and states in order to get this. And this, I'll close with this. I think it goes to the recklessness and the malice with which the defendants are acting, because it was the third part of a three-piece Los Angeles Times story investigation. They interviewed numerous witnesses. They looked at thousands of documents. If you haven't seen it, you can Google it. It comes right up. It's a great piece. And in the end, they quoted Purdue as saying in December of 2016 that they're only just getting started. They're now planning on taking this scheme abroad because we as Americans are consuming the vast number of opioids, so they still have a tremendous market abroad, and they're going to go do it abroad. It just sort of underscores that even with the knowledge that they have now, they have no incentive to stop.
Okay. That's it?
That's it. If you have any questions.
Oh, they're going to be, I'm sure, especially this guy next to me. He's the question man. So,
Okay, I'll do my best.
I'm not going to go ahead. I got Mr. Love on the queue, but he can start.
Is it Ms. Baig?
Yes,
B-A-I-G.
correct.
Okay, and I see you're from San Francisco?
I am.
And if we decide to use you folks, is it going to be Mr. Dowd that will be doing the
It
point?
will be a lot of us. Mr. Dowd will be involved, yes. I will be involved, Mark Dearman will be involved. There will probably be at least 4 to 6 partners involved and just as many associates, and we will add people as needed.
Okay. And, okay, that's my question. Thank you.
Well, that was easy.
The household action, for example, that Mark Dearman mentioned, for the trial, we had to try that case once and only settled it the night before trial on the second time. For both of those, we brought a team of more than 20 people from our firm to Chicago for a month to try that case. So we can do that because we have so many lawyers at the firm, and we will do that.
Mr. Hazuri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through the Chairman Spake, I don't know if I'm going to ask all the questions. I don't have a lot of questions, but just the process. Like, how do you pick and choose who we decide to go against? I hate to use that term, whatever y'all want to use. I mean, which companies and why? Is that fair to ask you?
It's absolutely fair. What we've done is we've looked at all of the largest manufacturers of opioids, and we've done our own investigation. We have internal investigators, we have external investigators. We have consulted with and retained experts in the area to help us gather the facts for that investigation. What we would propose is that we put together a complaint with the ones that we think are the most culpable based on that investigation. And you obviously would have the ultimate say. You review the complaint, and to the extent you see something that you feel is stronger than something else, or if there's a defendant that for whatever reason, you're not interested in pursuing, then that's where we go. But we do it based on our investigation of the bad act, of the false marketing, failure to report.
So if a city does it, Duval County, Jacksonville, and say you win, whatever we win, does this divvied up? Does it go any dollars or whatever we may receive? Does it go directly just to the city, or do you recommend, or are we supposed to look at divvying it up between the survivors or the families? And I have a big interest in human trafficking, and I know a lot of overdoses are a result of that too. And how is that generally done? Is it just like a lump sum that goes to the city? How do these people recover any of these costs or the deaths or whatever else may happen?
My understanding is that it would be a lump sum that would go to the city. It would go to the plaintiff.
Lump sum.
Which would be the city.
Lump sum.
And then it would be up to this body, I would suspect, to decide how that money would be distributed, because it would come as a lump sum to the city, and then that decision would rest with the council, I would suspect.
Yes, distributed or used to set up addiction treatment centers, or used for whatever purposes that this.
By then, we may just use it simply to cover our past costs the way they're going. So who knows what you do?
Also, Mr. Chairman, through the chair, some of these manufacturers, and I don't know if they're some of the ones you've already cited, was it Nacron? They manufacture the drug, and then they manufacture the counter to the drug as they come into the hospital to get them, leveled, I guess, or stable. Does that make any sense to y'all? Or
You know,
is it,
it's
I mean, it's
something
almost like they're already fessing up that they've got a problem, and then they're going to go back and say, but here's what we can do to, to help out with that. I'm not necessarily thinking maybe if they just do an overdose, this is what happens, and it's not our fault that they're overdosing. They're the ones that's responsible. But here they manufacture that too, and we talked to Dr. Palm, and he was agreeing to that. And we spend a lot of money, $400,000, I think, in our fire and rescue, just to provide that service. They're finally getting a little bit of a discount from the manufacturers. But I thought that was kind of interesting that here they provide the drug and then they provide the counter drug for the reaction from the.
I do too. I mean, I've looked at that very same thing, and it just imagine the irony of that. You create the problem on the one hand, and you make millions doing it, and then create on the other.
One last
win-win
question.
situation.
The final, what exactly would be the suit? Is it called a suit or the claim?
It would be a lawsuit, and it would be
Based on?
based on the false marketing. So you would have claims, statutory and tort claims. We purposefully didn't list every single cause of action here because we're in a public forum, but we would be happy to discuss with you privately. But essentially, it would be claims for false marketing and for failure to report suspicious sales. They would be statutory claims, and they would be tort claims.
Is that all the claims that were all these other manufacturers? Is that what the claims were
Yes.
for them as well? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Crescimenti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess through the chair to the representatives, what was the name of the firm again?
Robbins, Geller, Redmond, and Dowd.
Senator Geller,
Pardon me?
not the senator from Florida.
No.
No, Paul Geller, no.
Don't pay any attention to him.
Yeah.
He is a
So on the
Florida-
list of cases that you had earlier, Volkswagen, Enron, Household, et cetera, you talked about, or your counterpart talked about a couple of those cases in which you were clearly alleging that you were the lead counsel. Were any of those others, were you the lead counsel in any of those others, or were you co-counsel?
We were either lead or part of the steering committee if there were two firms lead. For example, in Enron, we were lead. HSBC, we were lead. United Healthcare, we were lead. These are all cases that we did the complaints, we did the filings, we worked with the state.
Okay. You mentioned the one in which the Jacksonville Police and Fire Pension Fund received a six-figure payout from, but that case, as I recall, we ended up involved in that pursuant to the recommendation of the pension fund's attorney, who in turn became co-counsel, if you will, for them joining that case. Does that sound right? So, I mean,
Yeah, so it did involve pension funds. They were plaintiffs in the litigation. The pension funds did receive funds. Whether or not a local firm here or the pension funds counsel associated with us for purposes of that, I can't answer that question off the top of my head now. What I can tell you is we were sole lead counsel in that case.
Okay.
Nobody else tried that case. Nobody else worked that case out. But we did coordinate.
all right. And so tell me a little bit about, has the firm filed any complaint on behalf of any plaintiff, or are you still in discussion mode? You referenced that the city of Delray Beach, I think, had hired you, and maybe other.
Yeah, so the city of Delray has retained us. We are talking with other states, other cities, other counties. It's the same recommendation that I made to Delray that I'd make to you. In order to do you justice, and in order to advise you, as I think we should advise you, and not do so in a public meeting whereby there's no privilege, what I would recommend at some point is the opportunity to look at the data and look at the things that you already have to assist you in making a determination as to what you could recover and what may not be recoverable. Because your questions are about whether or not individuals who have died or the trafficking. It's very hard to tell you what we can recover and what we can't recover without actually sitting down and seeing what data you have and the types of damages you have,
All right.
and doing a legal analysis.
I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that. That's a question on my list. But before we get there, I want you to answer the question I just asked you, and that is, have you filed any complaint on behalf of any plaintiff to date?
No, sir.
Okay. If you were to file a complaint for, let's say, a city in Florida, where would you file the case?
The decision would be between, if I'm assuming between state and federal court, if that's what you're asking me.
Right.
And that would be a decision that we would have to have a conversation about, because I think it involves litigation strategy and would not be something that I'd be comfortable discussing here.
Okay.
But that would be the two options, and there are pros and cons for both, and I would expect that you and maybe your general counsel would have input.
Which you certainly wouldn't envision filing complaints in state courts somewhere and federal courts elsewhere on the same claims for a variety of plaintiffs, would you?
I'm not sure what the hypothetical is there. If you're asking me whether or not I may be representing some state in the Northeast, and I might file that in federal court, and I might file a municipality here in Florida in state court, yeah, that could happen.
Okay. Now, back to a review of, our data, et cetera. What gives us standing?
Well, I think that, that is a legal question. I think that there is standing, and I think that that's a discussion that we would certainly be willing to have. But I believe that that is something that goes directly to litigation strategy and would be something that I would not be discussing here today.
Okay.
But I do think that that is something that that has been analyzed and that needs to be discussed, for sure.
I can certainly see where the 4,000 Florida, the survivors of the 4,000 fatalities each year have standing, but I'm kind of curious about us, and I'm not sure how we discuss that in private, because I guess my question now would go to our general counsel's office. Do we have the ability to convene a shade meeting in the absence of litigation?
Jason Gabriel here. Can you hear me? No.
Well, we can hear you. We're just not hearing you through the microphone.
Jason Gabriel, General Counsel. Generally, no, unless there's a pending case, which there isn't at the moment. But there's ways to manage that. We would probably, at the preliminary stage, speak to each of you individually, and then once you'd had, if we collectively decided to pursue something here, we would then have the opportunity after a pending case is filed to meet with you in the shade. But there's measures to be able to handle those conversations.
Is that something you could transact on the council's behalf and then disseminate your views or your takeaways with council members on an individual basis?
Sure, yes, through the chair to Councilmember Cressenbenny. What we could do is, after this meeting, and I'll take a lead from y'all as elected officials as to kind of how you want to look at this. I mean, we're still sort of in a, let's call it a, discovery phase here to figure out if this is something you want to pursue. I would get with, and members of my staff would get with this law firm, and we would analyze a little more detail, get a little more facts, and maybe a little more specific answer to some of your questions that, some of which we can't answer here today, and then get with you individually, and then at some point we'd manage a way to, for the council to act collectively if that's something you wanted to do.
Well, I'm going to have to duck out for a 2 o'clock meeting, but before I leave, I guess that's something I would be interested in, is perhaps tasking Mr. Gabriel to continue this dialogue, because I'm kind of somewhat fuzzy on standing, what kind of claim we can actually bring in terms of, additional expense associated with rescue transports or stuff. But I mean, the litigation costs may greatly end up outweighing whatever recovery we make.
Well, that needs to be clarified. I think they didn't bring that up.
And I will be glad to clarify that. We are proposing investigating this matter for you, looking at it, providing you advice, and if moving forward, to do so on a contingent basis, whereby our firm would incur all of the costs.
Okay.
The city and the county would incur none.
Okay.
We believe in this litigation. We think it's meaningful.
And Mr. Gabriel, so that's what I'd be interested in, Mr.
Yeah,
Gabriel.
I was gonna ask.
And the other thing I'd be interested in is it's been a few years. It's probably been 15 years, but this kind of reminds me of the tobacco case that came out of the state of Florida, and my memory or recollection of how that was handled is a little bit fuzzy, but it seemed like that was a that was kind of a broad-based affiliation of lawyers from different parts of the state of Florida. So Jason, if you could just maybe task somebody to do a one-page summary of how that worked, I'd just be interested in refreshing my memory banks on that case, because that was a big one.
And I'll also add that we had some involvement in the tobacco litigation in California, representing states and representing cities and counties.
Question, Benny.
Mr. Gabriel, before you leave, so I don't want to have you pop up, from a procedural standpoint and with regard to our charter, you have the power to engage them, especially in light of the fact that it would be on a contingency basis. Is that not correct?
To the chair and to this group of council members.
Thanks for coming, Sheriff. I see you sneaking out there, but I appreciate your sitting in on this. So, yeah, okay. You're going to meet Crescent Benny. Well, y'all could just stay here and meet somewhere up and that way you'd be participating twice. But I appreciate your sitting in on this. Thank you.
There's a couple of things to analyze here. One is this contingency, which actually does sound good because
right.
Obviously they'd incur the cost, and at some point later, I'd have to look at that. I don't think we've done that in a while, so we'd have to just kind of look and see how that works. But generally speaking, this would be the sort of thing that I believe, and don't commit me to this yet, but I think this is the sort of engagement I'd have to come to council for, because I'm authorized for certain types of engagements. This would be a litigation matter that would require...
I understand, even if it was, the magnitude of it would dictate that you probably would want some kind of resolution from the council to proceed on something like that anyway, which I understand. Even if you did have that power under the charter, it probably
it
still
would require some council action.
Okay.
Yeah.
That tells me that what the next step would be to investigate, and you review it and your staff review it, and then come back to us and tell us what you think.
Sure.
Yeah. So.
Sure. We can do some offline discussion, our office and the law firm, and then we can kind of maybe encapsulate some information for you, and then get with you individually, and then we can see where we go from there.
Okay.
If that meets your desire.
That's great, Mr. Love.
Thank you. Through the chair to Ms. Begg. Can you get us a copy of the slideshow?
Sure.
Because it didn't show up very well on our screen. I mean, some of the numbers are a little fuzzy. And also, to me, if we're going to spend $1.4 million with they're standing right there.
Yeah, you would think.
I mean, that's easy, and there's probably a lot more. So standing to me is pretty simple. It's just how many things we add to it is the question, and that's something we need to discuss.
I do agree that it seems that way, but I think that it should be discussed further. There is some significant analysis. And as far as the slideshow, what we'll do, if it's okay with everyone here, is get Carol, we'll send her the slideshow and some other materials so that she can distribute it to everybody.
That'd be great. Mr. Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and not really to y'all, to Mr. Gable, I guess, and to the chair. How do we pick y'all? I mean, is this, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I know y'all made a great presentation, you've got history, but how do you select the firm, Mr. Gabriel? I mean, is it because they're doing a great job and you singularly would want them, or do you make it competitive? I'm not looking to do that, but I'm just wondering how that process works.
Sure. Through the chair to Councilmember Missouri.
Is that a great question?
That was a very good question,
Yeah.
Mr. Missouri.
You get a star. You get a star on that,
A
Missouri.
very good question, Mr. Missouri. It always depends on the matter before us. I mean, in some cases, there's some firms that are, and these are professional services, but there are some firms that are just uniquely situated and qualified for a particular matter, and this seems to be one of those. We'll certainly look to make sure we always want to get the best, service for the taxpayer, and that's something that's, at the forefront. But, generally speaking, professional services like legal services, we will, as a Office of General Counsel, look and vet it ourselves, and then we'll say this is the best bang for the buck. It may be a slightly higher rate. In this case, we're talking contingency, so that's not even on the
Yeah, you're
table.
not talking about a buck, are you?
But typically, maybe it's a little higher rate, but you're going to get a better qualification when someone else might be at a lower rate and then charging you many more hours. So it's definitely the forefront, but we would vet that before we brought it to you for any action.
And Mark, did you, in Delray, did you say Palm Beach as well? Both of them signed on, or no?
Delray now.
How did Did they do a competitive bid, or they just
No.
sold proprietary to y'all?
They did not, and I think that part of the determination which was made in the public was is that we
Okay,
just
no, I
have-
was just wondering how some of them are doing this. I mean, I know y'all have expertise in it.
and some
I'm
are.
thinking of all the trial lawyers we have in Jacksonville that you probably know, and why they wouldn't be wanting to delve into this.
And certainly some are doing competitive process, and if that's what needs to be done here, we welcome that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Jason, you got anything else you want to ask? Anybody in the audience? I'll give you a shot right now if you got some question you'd like to ask before we close. Yes, sir. And if you just identify yourself for the record. Mr. Salem. Yeah, it is. Look at him. You can tell. He's,
Ron Salem, 3935 Buckskin Trail East, Jacksonville. I am speaking for myself. I work in this industry, and I want to make sure I'm clear that I'm not speaking for the company that I work for. I would also like to get a copy of the slides because they were unreadable from the audience standpoint.
Carol. Talk to Carol and she'll
I
get
could
it.
make a lot of comments, but I'll keep this brief. It's pretty clear that the issue of traditional opioids are flat or going down. Oxycodone, the commercial available products. In the state of Florida, we have done a much better job. I was on the board of pharmacy. We are controlling our pharmacists and pharmacies much better. Physicians are doing a much better job than they were, and the drug wholesalers were fined multi-million dollars, and some of them actually licenses were suspended. So if you look at those slides, the oxycodone numbers are flat or going down. It's the heroin numbers that are going up, okay? Synthetic fentanyl, et cetera. So I guess my question and I'm not an attorney, I paid for one to go to college, but I'm not one myself. How do you distinguish overdoses and these issues from synthetic heroin that's coming in from Mexico or somewhere else versus oxycodone? If you're going to sue somebody, you're suing manufacturers, and many of these cases are not related to their drug. So I'm unclear, or someone said we have 4,000 cases. Of those 4,000, how many of them were heroin versus traditional oxycodone?
They probably are not going to share their strategy, but I'll make an observation, personal observation. You may well be absolutely correct. However, who started it? That's the real issue. Who started it? And I think that they have a responsibility. When I see some of the statistics, the amount of prescription pills shipped into the state of West Virginia just recently, I will ask you again, who started the damn thing? And so you're right, absolutely. We're seeing a shift from fentanyl. But dadgummit, I think they're responsible for starting the doggone thing, and I think they ought to pay. That's just my personal opinion. And I'm not reflecting the opinion of anybody else. But, you know, I feel pretty strongly about this. Plus the fact I think it would send a heck of a message. Irresponsibility in that type of setting should be challenged and prosecuted in some form or fashion. So that's just my opinion. And if they want to respond to your question, they're more than welcome to. Maybe.
And I hear you. I guess my comments would be several years ago, when I was on the board, the situation for commercial available products is tremendously better than what it was. We now have a drug monitoring prescription program where my pharmacy and everyone in the state of Florida sends their data into Tallahassee. Before I fill a prescription, I can go online and see if this guy's doctor shopping, that kind of thing. So there are many more controls in place today over the last few years than there were 10, 15 years ago during the height of the opioid, traditional oxycodone crisis. Not to say they're not, and to address Councilman Hazuri's comment, these drugs are very effective for pain. They are very effective for pain. Just a quick story, I had a gentleman come to me at the YMCA who had some oral surgery, got 5 tablets for the pain. Well, he caught me as I was working out. What do I do with the other 4? Because all it took was 1 tablet and he felt okay. So it's a two-edged sword. They're very good, but you want to use them on a very limited basis, as the attorney said, and then you want to get rid of them once you're finished them, not keep them in your house. for other people to use.
That's another problem, too, that we have. But
Yeah.
let me tell you a story real quickly. I went to lunch with someone, it's been in the last month, and they told me a story where they had knee surgery, so I don't remember what it was, some knee problem he had with, and the doctor prescribed, and this has been in the last 6 months, doctor prescribed 90 days worth of pain pills. He took them for about the first week, I guess, and he said, I was feeling okay. I didn't really think I needed them, so I just stopped. He said, all of a sudden, I had a reaction to that. I had pains in my chest and all this stuff. I called the doctor, and the doctor said, you can't stop cold turkey like that.
Right.
But the real question he had in his mind is, why did the doctor prescribe 90 days of this stuff? And I had another instance where Lieutenant Rowley was listing in a medical, he works part-time in an emergency room. This was a recent story, too. Works part-time in the emergency room. The doctor comes in, and he prescribes for this patient. He had interviewed the patient. Rowley had interviewed the patient. He's a nurse in the emergency room. Interviewed the patient prior to that, and he said on a level of 1 to 10, what's your pain level? He said about a 3. Doctor comes in, and he prescribes an opioid to him. And Rowley suggested to the doctor politely, maybe just Advil, or ibuprofen would be appropriate in this instance. I still think we've got a problem. I'm sorry. And I know that we're better than we were. I don't think we're good enough yet. And I think the most horrifically bad situation is these innocent people that have been prescribed opioids and have gotten hooked on the dadgum things and go over a cliff. And we know we've got a lot of them in Jacksonville. That's how they got started out. I've heard numbers of 75%.
But Councilman Gullard, what you're describing is a prescribing problem potentially. Should they have been filled? I'm not sure the cases that you just described are a manufacturer wholesaler problem.
Oh, I don't. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But the wholesalers and the manufacturers, if they know that they've got a problem with overindulging with those drugs, probably going to put a little pressure on those people that are prescribing too.
But my point is, if you go back and look at these cases, these wholesalers, there were wholesalers in South Florida that were sending to a little independent pharmacy thousands and thousands of tablets of oxycodone.
And he wants to get rid of them.
And they were, those wholesalers were fined, lost their licenses, but this was several years ago.
No.
Can I make one other comment?
Sure, and then I'm going to call on Mr. Love.
In regard to our study, our $1.4, $1.6 million in treating these patients, I've had several members of the council come to me, because I was in academics, did this kind of stuff many years ago. I think it's very, very important, I've talked to Dr. Palm, that we collect this data very carefully so that 6 months from now, when we start evaluating how we did, that we've got good clinical data and can show that those dollars were spent effectively and we saved some people.
Well, I think that's the whole intent. Dr. Palm's very, very cognizant of that and has stated that on numerous occasions that he thought that the data was critical to the whole thing. So, yeah, we know that the emphasis is going to be there.
Has to be.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Mr. Love.
Don't go away, Ron. Through the chair to Ron Salem. Thank you for coming up here. And as a pharmacist, I think you got a really good side to this as well. I know that we had a crackdown on the pill mills a couple of years ago, and you're all familiar with that. On the fentanyl part, okay, are doctors prescribing fentanyl now at all?
There's a commercially available fentanyl product.
Okay.
That is prescribed because it's a patch.
It's a patch.
It doesn't have to be taken orally.
Okay.
So those that are in significant pain that can't take it orally for whatever reason, a patch is used.
So the deaths from fentanyl are probably coming in illegally? Is that what your thoughts are?
That is correct.
Okay. I agree with you.
I'm not saying all of them, but I think the vast majority of them.
I got you. I know. I'm not. That's why I said you think. And I agree with you that this test that we're running for the 6 months, getting a lot of data is real important, and that's going to be the real key is finding out exactly what they OD'd on and all the data so we can know what we're looking at. And I think that's very important. Thank you, Ron, for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zuri.
Just quickly, Ron, Doc, just to mention to you, we debated this thing pretty extensively with it's a pilot program, and certainly when you put $1.1 what was it?
$4
million into this program. The intent is, and that's what Dr. Palm's doing, the intent is to making sure that the data is there, that we're able to follow it. One of them wanted to do it, I think, one of the council members for 3 months, which doesn't give you the information that you were talking about. So hopefully afterwards, because we don't have another source per se to continue this program along, our dependency on that, no pun intended, is going to be results oriented, and that's why we did it. That was a lot of money, but it also is going to be something that will help us afford to continue to do it if it's a successful program. And hopefully, if you're here, then you'll be a part of that.
Well, just my concern is I don't want them to come back in 6 months and the data wasn't collected effectively.
No.
And then the council's in a position to where they can't make a good clinical decision or a good business decision on whether that should continue or not, and where we get the money to continue.
That happens oftentimes.
But we're starting it fresh now. We
Right.
need to make sure that we're doing all the right things,
Right.
because clinicians often are not good data collectors. You got to have people. I've done it. I've seen it. You got to
Well,
have people that are collecting that
I
data.
appreciate
They're
that.
not necessarily taking care of the patient.
I think if you talk to Dr. Palm about specifics, I think he
Right.
fully understands the significance of that. If we're going to extend the program, obviously we have to have good data collection. So he's
took a
I think
major
he's on
step
top
in
of that. I trust him implicitly there on that.
That was
on
a very
score.
big step that we took to do that, and so we are very cognizant that we want
Okay.
it to succeed.
We're getting a little off line here because we were talking about suing and now we're talking about data. So anyone else in the audience that has anything? We do have the former council auditor in the room with us, and I guess he's got a lot of time on his hands, so he yeah, that's Kyle, right? You want to say something, Dr. Palm? Have at it. Anyone else? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raymond Palm, River Region Human Services and Gateway Community Services. I just want to really quickly echo Ron's concern and just share with you all that University of Florida, researchers at Gateway, researchers at St. Vincent's are all teaming up to gather the data. And we're having one of the timeline issues is going through the St. Vincent's IRB. So we're doing everything. We've got all the, no, he's right. I'm a clinician. I don't do data. However, I got the people that do data doing data. So I think it's really important to understand that. The other piece is I want to echo what Ron said also, because anecdotally, we know that people that started using prescription opioids are the ones that are now dying from fentanyl. We know that anecdotally. So through the pilot, we are going to be collecting the data as to where their habit started and how they ended up on now fentanyl. One of the issues, though, that I think I've got a beginning of a handle on is we are going to be actually testing for fentanyl. I now have a company that is testing for 4 or 5 different analogs. I'm hoping to get them in the pilot and give of their service. So, a negative for fentanyl doesn't mean they didn't die from an analog of fentanyl. It also doesn't mean they didn't die from fentanyl. So we've got to tighten this as much as technically possible. That's last couple of comments only. This is a much bigger issue than just the pharmaceutical. They're big. But, and I'm not an attorney, and I'm certainly not suggesting we do this, but I think we also have to take into context JCO, the Joint Commission. They're right on the bandwagon with oxycodone folks. Say, the smiley faces. We don't want people leaving your doctor's offices and the EDs without a smiley face. So give them the medications that they need. And I don't ever hear anyone, I hate to do this, I'm going to get in trouble, but calling them out. They were responsible. They were the ones pushing doctors to actually do some of the prescribing. And our state legislators, I'm sorry, we got a crisis going on here, and we're seeing reduced funding. As far as I'm concerned, they're complicit. As if our state legislators know that the death rate is so high, and they're making decisions to cut funding for substance abuse programs, to me, that's being complicit in future deaths related to this problem. So I'm a little
Amen. Amen. I agree with you there. Thanks, Dr. Palm. Mr. Loves.
Okay, Dr. Palm, thanks for coming and through the chair. appreciate all your energy and your knowledge on this. We really appreciate it. I think we're going to have a great 6 months, and we're going to get something out of it, and it's going to be groundbreaking. What's IRB? You said something about IRB.
Yeah. Internal Review Board. Before you can do any data collection of patients associated with an organization, they have a review board that has to review all the documentation, all the data that's going to be shared, anything that might in any way harm a patient or in some way disclose information about a patient that shouldn't be disclosed. They are a review board that makes sure you're starting the process right and that the process continues to be right.
Okay. And then
Mostly complying with federal law, correct?
Federal and state,
course.
yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
And then you said St. Vincent. So is it St. Vincent's going to be the only ER that's going to be collecting all that data, and we're going to be doing this for 6 months and then analyzing and then deciding whether we're going to do more? And you talked about cuts from the state. We went from what to what? Do you remember?
Yeah, I believe it was a $4.4 million cut in substance abuse funding, about 3.8 for substance abuse funding.
Okay, and what did it start at? I mean,
I'm sorry,
was it
3.8
10 million?
higher.
We cut three, or was it a 10% cut, a 50% cut?
I don't have those figures.
Okay.
Department of Children and Families would have those exact figures, and Lutheran Social
DCF.
Services would have those
Okay,
exact figures.
perfect. Really appreciate you being part of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? It was Mr. Salem's attempt to change me, but I'm old and crotchety and pretty steadfast. I'm ready to clear the decks, pull out the guns, and fire away, because frankly, I do feel like they are much responsible. I understand the other points that were brought up. This is, and I said initially, this is multifaceted. There's a lot of pointing that we can do beyond just the pharmaceuticals, but I still think that it's appropriate for us to give serious consideration to pursuing it. And so therefore, I would ask that the General Counsel will engage with them. I think the fact that they will take it as a contingency, where I fully realize that if there was a victory, they're going to reap a great bonanza, but that's a commitment to and shows a passion, I think, for a particular case that to me is demonstrative of what they think that there is as a potential. So I lean very high. I don't know that when we start talking about going out and getting competitive pricing, bids, whatever, I don't know that there are going to be a lot of law firms who want to step up and fund that thing internally from the initial suit up until the final resolution. So I hope we'll take a very hard look at it and then come back as quickly as possible to the council. So, Mr. Azuri.
Mr. Chairman, I think you're right. I mentioned the competitiveness of it because I didn't know what the process would be and what the protocol was. But I think the message that we want to send up here, I don't like the traffickers, whether it's human trafficking in drugs or sex or labor, whatever it is. And so they're parts and parcel of this whole matter. And certainly the manufacturers are a big part of it. I think what we're doing here today is saying we have a serious crisis in Jacksonville, like it is in Ohio and other places all throughout the United States, and that we're sending a strong message that we're going to let it stop right here in Jacksonville, Florida. We're not just going to sit back and try to patchwork orange something like this, putting Band-Aids on it. I think this is major surgery, and I think if we do the suit, then they'll get a strong message from the city of Jacksonville and Duval County that we not only mean business, but it's going to stop right here.
Okay. Anyone else? With that, we're adjourned. Thank you all for attending. And that